So, all of these changes that were happening in the 1990s, as the United States is getting more diverse and minorities are growing in their percentage of the population, resulted in a phenomenon that we refer to as the culture wars. So, the culture wars were a pushback against this multicultural trend in the United States. Many people who are more socially and politically conservative believed that celebrating diversity was not helpful, that it undermined a sense of unified nationalism in the United States. This pushback against multiculturalism became evident in debates over things like bilingual education and affirmative action, as well as serious debates over whether illegal immigrants could have access to healthcare and welfare benefits. Because of this pushback to multiculturalism, by the year 2000, 23 states had passed laws making English the official language. Now, do they need to do that? Is English functionally threatened in dominance in places? No, but this was more of a symbolic middle finger, if you will, to multiculturalism. Groups like the Christian Coalition, led by Pat Robertson, who was an evangelical minister and current talk show host, focused on restoring traditional values by campaigning against abortion, against gay rights, secularism, and weirdly, government funding of the arts. I don't know what people have against art. There's also concern amongst social conservatives over issues like evolution, the changing racial climate, right, the changing demographics of the United States, and the breakdown of the nuclear family. So all of this kind of comes together in the 1990s with concerns over gay marriage and concerns over women. So the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996 was passed to address this alarm over a prospective expansion of gay marriage after the Bear v. Mikey case in 1993 in Hawaii, with many people arguing that marriage was between one man and one woman. And when they're talking about declining family values, when we look at the demographics, there are some big trends that support their concerns over the breakdown of the traditional family structure. By the time we get to the 1990s, more than 50% of marriages ended in divorce, and 40% of births were to women who were not married. Two-thirds of women worked outside of the home while still earning less pay, and when you looked at census data, the nuclear family, identified as mom, dad, and kids, did appear to be in decline. Less than half of households registered in the census had married couples, and only about a fifth or 20% of households that had married couples also had kids. So people were getting married at seemingly lower rates and having kids at seemingly lower rates once they got married. Part of these changes are some cultural changes, people accepting a little bit more cohabitation without marriage or kids born out of wedlock. Some of it also is the changing economic and educational realities for women. By the time we get to the end of the 1990s, women are earning 60% of college degrees. This is up from 35% of all college degrees in 1960. And women were earning 40% of all advanced degrees, which was a huge jump forward after only earning 5% in 1960. Today, women earn more than half of all degrees at all levels, whether we're talking about associate's or bachelor's degrees, or some more specialized degrees like a master, a PhD, a JD, or an MD. Okay, so women now have eclipsed the 50% mark in recent years for the advanced degrees. So all of these things were not seen as a bonus by members of the culture wars. Their particular idea of the traditional family was that women should stay at home, be married, and raise kids. And with women gaining increasing levels of education, this was seen as less likely that women would give up the value of their degree, or the perception of giving up the value of degree by staying at home. So, this anxiety over the direction of American culture and of it seeming to move away from this traditional cult of domesticity in which women stay at home and have kids and are in a straight marriage with this close nuclear family, provoked some extreme responses. Anxiety over this shift in American culture promoted dangerous shifts towards fascism. Now, fascism is a political ideology that is very, very conservative. And so there is these fringe elements within the political and conservative movement in the United States that becomes even more extreme and polarized and radicalized because of this anxiety over culture wars. So when I'm talking about radicalization, I'm not talking about all political conservatives or social conservatives here. I'm talking about a small group within this movement. There is increasing sense of radicalism against abortion, especially after the Supreme Court takes up the issue of abortion for the first time since Roe v. Wade in 1992 with the case of Casey versus Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania. In this case, the Supreme Court did not strike down abortion, much to the dismay of social conservatives, but rather reaffirmed a woman's right to access abortion by clarifying that women were not required to notify husbands or partners before procedures, which was at the heart of the law that was being contested in Pennsylvania, that women had to give notification to their partners before seeking an abortion. The Supreme Court struck that down. But in the Casey versus Planned Parenthood ruling, they did state that states were allowed to regulate other aspects of abortion. So, in other words, they couldn't mandate that women notify their partners, but they could do things like pass laws designed to regulate the health and safety of abortion clinics, which many states have done today, and including in pushing some boundaries on what is acceptable under health and safety. We're still trying to find that line where this concern over health and safety ends up being more concern over trying to eradicate abortion. So there are still cases before the Supreme Court, including in this current legislative case as of recording in 2020, that we're waiting to hear back on. After the Supreme Court upholds abortion, there's a rise in violent attacks on abortion providers and clinics, including murders of doctors and bombings of clinics throughout the 1990s. But the abortion rate declines. Why does the abortion rate decline? Some of it could be from people who are afraid that if they go to a clinic, they may be targeted for violence, but a lot of it has to do with an increased use of contraception. So people are not having as many unplanned pregnancies and therefore not seeking out abortion as a remedy to becoming unexpectedly pregnant. And so as contraception use increases, the rate of abortion drops. There's also the phenomenon of private militias like the Aryan Nation that are created under the fear that a federal government that was strong represented the repression of their freedom, especially when it came to government enforcement of gun laws. These militias oftentimes cited American Revolutionary era writers, and they argued that the federal government plotted to surrender our sovereignty to the United Nations. A lot of these militia groups originated in the wake of American involvement in Vietnam. The first generation of these militia activists had actually had a fairly high number of Vietnam veterans involved in the movement. And it began out of this concern over government disrespect for these veterans' sacrifice. And what began originally as a movement to try to better or improve the government response to their concerns eventually became an anti-government movement. So these people identified the government as beyond redemption, as irredeemable, and therefore it should be the target of destruction. So these private militia groups like the Aryan Nation shift away away from political conservatism and towards outright domestic terrorism. And we see this with the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 when Timothy McVeigh, who had been part of one of these right-wing militia groups, targeted the federal building in Oklahoma City with a truck bomb, which killed 168 people, including many children in an on-site daycare that was close to the epicenter of where the bomb went off. McVeigh denied his involvement in militia groups, denied this sense of radicalization. However, there is overwhelming evidence that McVeigh had taken part in a militia group. If you're interested in reading about the evolution of militia groups, I highly recommend the book Bring the War Home, which is a book about the rise of the militia movement from the 70s through the 90s that does talk a lot about Timothy McVeigh.